Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Invent Penn State Venture and IP Conferences session number 1, Investing in Rural and Heartland America. My name is Matt Weinbaum. Thank you for joining us today. I'm a partner at Dentons Cohen & Grigsby based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Dentons is a law firm of approximately 10,000 attorneys worldwide, and I'm a member of the Venture Technology Group. My focus is on representing emerging companies as well as investors in the Midwest and the Mid-Atlantic. Thanks to everyone for attending. In particular, I would like to thank all of our dedicated sponsors. We wouldn't be here without your support during this difficult year. And during this difficult year, we're especially grateful for your support. The theme for this program is investing in small markets and heartland university research. 75% of venture capital funding is deployed on the coasts, but about 80% of the research is done in the heartland of America. The assumption is that this creates a mismatch where there are innovators and disruptive technologies in small markets that are undercapitalized, and conversely, deals getting chased to unusual valuations in traditional VC markets like the Bay Area, New York, and Boston. Today, we're going to meet folks at several firms that see the opportunity in smaller markets and invest in these smaller markets. The first person we're going to meet is Falon Donohue. She's a partner at Narya. Falon, will you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Narya and Narya's investment thesis when you get the chance?
Hi, thank you. My name is Falon Donohue. I'm a partner at Narya. We're a fairly new firm, started the very last day of 2019 officially. We're an early stage venture capital fund that invests nationally in both life science companies and technology companies. Series A, Series B would be our sweet spot. And thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Falon. The next participant in our panel is Abby Lyall from Big Idea Ventures. Abby, can you tell us a bit about Big Idea, the companies that you guys typically target for investment, and your investment thesis?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Matt. Hi, everybody. My name is Abby Lyall. I'm a vice president at Big Idea Ventures. We are a food and agriculture focused venture firm, and we have a few different funds that are all focused on different areas of the food and agriculture space. But the one that I'm going to be focusing on today is called Generation Food Rural Partners. And that fund is focused on commercializing university research in food, protein, and agriculture. So we partner with 10 incredible universities across the United States, Penn State being one of them. And we identify the top pieces of research and IP coming out of that university in food, protein, and ag, and we spin up new companies around that research to get it into the market and to create job growth and economic development in rural communities across the US. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Abby. And last but not least is Dr. Lydia McClure. She's with Research Bridge Partners. Lydia, can you tell us a bit about yourself and a bit about Research Bridge and what you guys tend to focus on?
Sure, Matt. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Research Bridge Partners focuses on academic inventors, so faculty and postdocs and grad students, and we are focused right now in the pharmaceutical and biotech, life sciences areas and health science. And we're really looking to engage early to try and figure out how to create investable entities that the coastal investors recognize as being something that they can easily interact with.
Thanks for that, Lydia. I guess sticking with you for the first question. So working at a very early stage in the universities in the heartland of the country, what are some of the principal obstacles that you're seeing to help these folks commercialize their inventions and take them out of the university sphere?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, there are quite a few, but ones we have decided to focus on most intently are talent. And I'm talking about business talent. Often what faculty are doing on campuses are very, they've spent maybe $10, $20 million of federal funds on these projects. And these individuals, the faculty, the postdocs, they are the best in the world at what they're doing. And yet they're in ecosystems where the business talent that should be matched to them to take their inventions and their technologies forward are not the same best in class, right? Those individuals geographically sit in a different area. So in order to give the technology and the research the best chance to reach as many people as possible, get that societal benefit. Our plan is to really match those really elite business talent, those individuals who've done it before, know how to do it, with the faculty who are the ones that can iterate the technology and evolve it going forward.
That's interesting. Are you, by doing that, are you focused on having people interact remotely, where you might bring on, a CFO or a CEO or COO from outside to work with someone to work with a team to help them build the company, or do you fly those folks in to the Heartland to have them work directly with them?
I should mention we're a young firm, so we've been around for just a few years. So our current evolution is that we, use our networks to find individuals on the business side who would be interested in working with a technologist that's not in San Francisco or Boston or New York City. So that's a first filter. And then we're a nonprofit. We do have a venture fund in our nonprofit, but that allows us to be more flexible with how we do a lot of our work. And so we do facilitate some of that transit, which is a lot of that cost that these coastal talent don't necessarily want to spend money flying out to do some diligence on your technology. So it is, as much as we love this virtual environment, real trust-based relationships take a lot of time, and so we do fly people out. Sure,
thanks for that. And Abby, you mentioned that you guys at Big Idea Ventures have a number of partnerships with universities. Can you expand on that and expand how that's been helpful in kind of teasing out that talent and also making investments?
Absolutely, yes. So what we noticed while we were building out one of our other funds was that so much of the incredible technological innovations that we thought were really innovative and disruptive in the food and ag sector were coming out of universities. And while all of the universities that we work with have amazing tech transfer offices, there are limits to basically the amount of manpower and the amount of capital that are available to get those innovations into the market. So those are the big gaps that we addressed, and that's what we're trying to solve with our Generation Food Rural Partners Fund. And a big component of that, as Lydia mentioned, is the people. So we have 100+ person mentor network through an accelerator program that we run. And that's a lot of folks from all different disciplines, including operations and manufacturing, marketing, business development. And we bring those folks in not only to advise new companies we create, but also to be CEOs and COOs and actually come and join the leadership teams of those organizations. And that's a key part of our business model, because while the scientists at the universities are very knowledgeable about that aspect of the business, it's not necessarily the best use of their time or their skill sets to have them be focused on things like HR and operations and sales and things that aren't necessarily in their wheelhouse. They're much more valuable in the lab and working on making, new scientific discoveries and technological development. So that's a key piece of the puzzle that we're trying to solve as well.
Sure, that certainly makes sense. Going back to one thing that you said that I thought was interesting, you spent a lot of time working with the tech transfer offices in a number of these universities. Do you find that there are certain without going into details on names but in general, do you find that there are certain elements of tech transfer offices and negotiating licensing deals where certain tech transfer offices have been easier to deal with, whereas others have been more difficult? And are there any? Is it a specific thing of having the right people who are used to bring these technologies to market there? Is that what's most important for these offices, or is it more understanding what's market as far as terms in terms of licensing and stuff like that?
I definitely think, well, first of all, you're absolutely right that there's a massive variability in terms of, I would say, the receptiveness of universities to a fund like ours. I think Penn State's actually a really good example of a university that was super open and receptive to what we were doing and really encouraging of our wanting to approach them and wanting to partner with them. And we've seen that, I'll call it an entrepreneurial spirit across the whole group of 10 universities that we're currently working with. I think that's really what it comes down to is, does the university administration have that sort of entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial ethos? I think you get, historically, the performance of a faculty member has been measured really just based on papers and how much they publish. And now with some universities, you're starting to see more of a focus on rewarding and promoting faculty members based on more entrepreneurial goals. Like, did this tech get commercialized? Did this tech actually make it out in the market? And I think that universities that have that mindset and incentivize and reward their faculty based on those things are the ones that are best poised to work with a fund like ours, because we know that this university has programs and a support system in place to encourage entrepreneurship that we can plug into. And that's the best case scenario for us, because a university that has lots of great entrepreneurship support already on campus is just a much more hospitable environment for a new spin-out company that we're creating.
Sure. And Falon, I see you shaking your head in agreement, nodding in agreement. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Narya and how you guys are sourcing deals. Is it at the university level? Is it coming out of universities, or is it coming out of other sectors of the economy?
Yeah, no, we spend a lot of time with universities where we're building those relationships in different states across the country. But Narya is typically just a little bit later stage. So for the most part, companies spinning out of a tech transfer office are going to be a bit early for us. I'll just agree with everything Abby and Lydia said about tech transfer offices and the entrepreneurial spirit and how that's such an important part of that. In Ohio, we don't have a silver bullet and we still have a really long way to go, but things are improving, every day in the state of Ohio. Innovation districts are a big part of that for us, which is just focused on collaboration. And those are anchored by our universities. So in Columbus, Ohio State, partnered with Nationwide Children's Hospital and with a lot of capital fueled by the state of Ohio is creating an innovation district. We have one in Cleveland. We have one in Cincinnati with University of Cincinnati and Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And I've really just found that that's the magic. It's getting a lot of smart people in the same area. And that includes venture capitalists, entrepreneur in residence, the folks at the university, just getting these people in the same area where they can, hopefully engineer a little bit of serendipity is how we see these things being successful. And the state of Ohio is doing a lot to try to engineer that. But Narya relies a lot on our inbound deal flow for the first year, where we've only been at this since really the pandemic started, and getting out there has been a little bit tough. When we're all grounded to our home offices, and we'd all been in seed stage investing prior to that. So we've spent the first year really combing through those, hundreds of relationships we built with seed investors and seeing what's maturing and bubbling up that meets our criteria. Sure.
Do you see sticking, since you guys said that you were founded like at the start of the pandemic, things from my perspective, at least, has been a lot more delocalized. And do you see that kind of spilling out into the broader investment world, where you guys are looking at opportunities in places where you might not have otherwise, because of the fact that you Zoom with them as opposed to going out and having to actually meet with them, and you recognize that there is a company that is, hitting the key KPIs that you guys look for to make a Series A or Series B investment. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think in our kind of old school mentality, we would put things off until we were in person. So, I'll chat with you in 3 weeks because I'm going to be in Chicago that day. And so you would put things off, and sometimes you'd miss things as a result of that. Now we can take things as they come. It doesn't depend on our travel schedule. And so, we're able to see things as they're in motion and strike pretty quickly when we need to. Pre-pandemic, the team had divided up the country into different regions because we wanted to really be a part of the ecosystem, not just stop by once a quarter, but really engage in that ecosystem and be a part of that. And that kind of blew up. And since then, it's been a little more chaotic. We don't have a pattern as to how we're engaging, but I think we're building really cool relationships across the country, and to your point, in areas that were not originally planned to be a focus area for us.
Sure, that's great. Abby, sort of on the same topic, I mean, do you find that you have that your deal flow from other parts of the country that you might not have recognized before has been enhanced almost by the pandemic? I know that's an odd concept, but we see it, at least I see it from time to time as well, just based on the fact that people have realized that they have to communicate in different ways.
Sure. Well, we're a global firm. So I would take that and multiply it by a factor of 10.
Sure.
We have offices in New York and Singapore, and we're coming soon with a Paris office this summer. And we have, we run accelerator programs out of those offices. And before the pandemic, it's so funny to think that I once had this mindset after everything that's happened. But before the pandemic, we would require companies that wanted to do our accelerator program to relocate to New York or Singapore for 5 months in order to participate. And we had this mindset where we couldn't deliver the value that we needed to deliver through the accelerator unless it was in person. And looking back on that mindset that I had now from the lens of everything that's happened over the past year, it seems so silly to me now. We've successfully run 1.5, almost 2 now accelerator programs completely virtual. And not only has our quality of deal flow improved significantly, because we've gotten companies into the accelerator that had families or had other commitments in their hometowns and weren't able to relocate. We were able to base those decisions purely on the quality of the company and the investment, not based on whether or not they were able to move. So not only has the quality of the deal flow improved, but also the quality of the support that we're able to give them has increased exponentially as well, because our network of mentors has expanded to include people that weren't able to come into our office of New York or Singapore in person. So we've got great talent from places like Arkansas, where Tyson, which is one of our LPs, is located, or lots of great folks in Chicago that we work with that are able to come in and speak with our companies in a virtual way, even some that are all the way across the globe in Singapore and other parts of Asia. So I think that having that mindset of not just expanding your deal flow pipeline, but also expanding your portfolio support pipeline, and the additional folks that you can bring to the table and the connections that you can make, making that a global thing instead of a local thing, I think is incredibly powerful.
And, I find that interesting. The conventional wisdom is typically, you'll find a target company in a smaller community, and they might take on seed funding or Series A funding, and the lead investor in that round might say, hey, you guys should really consider, or you need to relocate to San Francisco or New York or Boston or one of these markets in order to participate, in order to expand and do what you need to do in order to grow. What you're saying, it's almost like that's being turned on its head, and that's really changing and kind of a unique feature of what's going on. Have your Tyson's is obviously based in Arkansas. Have your LPs come to more embrace this concept as well? Have people come to acknowledge that these companies don't necessarily need to be in a major venture market to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, most of our LPs are strategics. So most of them are global, multinational companies with offices all over the globe. We've Givaudan, Bell Group, Bueller, Temasek out of Singapore. So we've got a really global list of LPs. And I think for those folks, they're really focused on the value that the companies we invest in can bring to the table. They could care less if they're based in New York or if they're based in Iowa or if they're based in San Francisco. It doesn't matter to them at all. They want to see smart founders. They want to see great technologies, innovative developments, people that are doing something different than what everybody else in the industry is doing. And that's something that I think is incredibly powerful about a company that's from a smaller town or a city that doesn't get a lot of venture attention, is that you're outside of that sort of bubble where people are sort of thinking about the same problems and thinking about problems in the same way. And you're encountering new problems and thinking of new ways to solve them that folks that are in that sort of Silicon Valley VC or New York VC bubble aren't thinking of. And I think that's incredibly valuable to RLPs, but also to the broader market and space as a whole.
Sure. I think that certainly makes sense. And Lydia, I guess, conversely with that, when you're working with university professors and you're working with folks, is there, have you found that there's a bit of a hesitancy to move to other locations if they need to, or have people been pretty comfortable staying where they are? Can you speak to that to a certain extent?
Sure. Because we are who we are, and I think we're looking to match with people who are similarly minded, our faculty don't seem to care either way. They just want their, cures to reach the patients. But, what has actually happened in our portfolio is that the company headquarters tend to be where the CEO is, or the investors, the downstream investors. But the hub of the technology development, the research is still within the university. And that's because the infrastructure we have within the US to encourage that, like STTRs or SBIRs, really do help that money for the technology go back into the original lab. So there is a lot of that, I think, more on the administrator side at universities than there is on the faculty side, since faculty tend to be more mobile anyway.
Sure, that's great. You touched on, a few sources of non-dilutive funding at the end of that. Do you have any and universities are typically very helpful with respect to the non-dilutive financing for these companies. What would you say that you think universities could do better or improve upon to basically bring to tee up the investment opportunities for venture investors? I obviously open this up to all of you guys. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on what universities could do to improve on improve the prospects for their young companies and young founders.
If we're talking about the universities as kind of administrators, the universities themselves, obviously the big one is creating IP suites versus one patent at a time. So having an IP strategy that is really protective against whatever that small entity is going to come up against, or aggressive, whatever it needs to be. And sometimes that means spending a lot more money on strategy than the universities have the budget for. We all know that there isn't a huge budget for university intellectual property. One of the aspects of our nonprofit is actually helping with that a little bit. So bringing in some of the right IP lawyers from the big firms to come and do some sort of, as we like to say, red shirt on the football field, come up and say, how would somebody attack this lab's portfolio, and where could we seam up the edges here and there? I mean, it really does make a huge difference when you're trying to get to that next level, and with any industry that you're trying to go into.
Sure. Abby, Falon, do you have any thoughts on that as well?
On ways for universities to improve access to capital? Yeah, I definitely think that building a really strong sort of corporate engagement or investor engagement platform, and I think a lot of the universities that we work with do this really well, having folks that are liaisons with corporations in particular industries or investors in particular industries, wherever the university has their strengths in IP, if it's a great engineering school, if it's a great ag school, if it's a great biomedical school, having folks that go out and make those relationships with corporates and investors in this space and really talk to them and really learn about what their problems are and what their biggest issues are, and then kind of direct the research that their faculty are doing around those problems. I think that would give those innovations a much better shot at commercialization, because I've seen this a lot with innovations working with big companies, is that a big company like Tyson, for example, will identify a problem. a company will come forward with a solution to that problem that's very technologically innovative, and then it just won't make economic sense for a reason that those researchers would never have thought of, because all they're thinking about is the technological feasibility. While if there had been that sort of back and forth conversation between the corporate or the strategic and the faculty member or the researchers that are working on the technology, you would understand what's important to them, and you would understand that there's more dimensions beyond just getting this technology to work, but also getting it to work while plugging into the infrastructure that the company has to a point where it's usable and economically feasible. And I think those kinds of conversations, to the extent that universities can have those on behalf of their researchers, will give that technology a much greater shot at commercialization and, really solid returns for both the university and maybe those faculty members.
That's a great answer. Thank you, Abby. Falon, do you have anything further? Any further thoughts?
I'll agree with all of that, and I'll just add, reducing complexity and getting a deal done, reducing the time it takes to get a deal done. A company in California, commercialized out of Stanford, could have 1,000 employees before we get it out the door, and in some of our universities. So I think that's an important piece of it. Ohio's public universities have recently signed a pledge called the Ohio IP Promise, and are working together on a regular basis to try to make this process easier on the entrepreneurs and more standardized. It won't exactly look like a Google checkout, but it'll be a lot less complex than it was.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I can speak from personal experience as well. I mean, the more straightforward it is, and the more knowledgeable the tech transfer office, the easier it is to move through the university system, and the smoother it is for all parties. Moving on to the terms of deals that you guys see with companies that are coming out of regions that aren't, the New Yorks, the San Franciscos, the Bostons. Are there certain things that you guys require or prefer in your deal terms for Series C and Series A rounds that would differ from what a standard term sheet would look like for a company on the coast, or is everything sort of contingent upon the company itself rather than the region in which it's located? Falon, I guess I can start with you on that question.
Yeah, I'm racking my brain. I mean, I've certainly seen terms that are different in the Midwest versus the West Coast, but I don't think that will be applicable to NARIA. I think our terms would look very similar to what you would see out of a West Coast fund. My partners are from a West Coast fund, so.
Sure. No, that's helpful. Abby, I'd be curious as to your thoughts, if there's anything that Big Idea insists on. I recognize that you have strategics that invest and other considerations.
Yeah, so it's really that, like, the terms of a deal are very dependent on sort of that FOMO factor, in my opinion. So the more investors that you have sort of vying for space in your round, the higher evaluation you're able to command. And so that's really sort of the driving force behind valuations, in my opinion. And I think we see this a lot in food and ag, especially in the alt protein space. So our accelerator fund is focused on alt protein investments, and we see tons and tons of hyperinflated valuations because there's just so much money in the space now, and so many funds are trying to get into the space. It's just sort of basic supply demand economics. So I think the extent to which companies that are in, smaller towns or areas where there is less of a VC presence, the extent to which they can get out and network with VCs outside of their local area and drum up that interest and that FOMO factor, I think that's really what it comes down to. You can be based anywhere, but if you have VCs from all over the place fighting over space in your round, that's what's going to get you that really high valuation and prevent you from getting diluted.
Yeah, of course. I mean, conversely, that makes sense. If you have multiple term sheets that are out there, it's easy to improve the prospects for you.
And there's many companies in New York and San Francisco that don't get interest and therefore have to take low terms. I would say it's less about the extent to which geography matters, is the extent to which it enables you or negatively impacts you in that connecting with other VCs and connecting with other investors factor. I think that's really where it comes into play.
Sure, that makes sense. And Lydia, I know you guys tend to focus on more earlier stage. I mean, do you convey these sort of messages to the folks that you work with, and what's their kind of response to that from a founder perspective?
Yeah, well, just to follow up on what Abby just said, there's a lot of natural work that gets done in ecosystems that are rich and strong and large that doesn't get done in the geographies that we're talking about. And we've built our venture fund to somewhat kind of help with that. It's venture philanthropy. So it's a little different. Our terms do look different from coastal terms. And that's on purpose because there isn't the ecosystem to do the natural work that gets done in the coffee shops in San Francisco. So, we're pre-seed, we have a convertible note. It's as friendly as you could possibly get. And, our LPs are foundations. And so there's, when we're launching it's called a PRI fund, program related investment fund. And when you do that, you really need to make sure that the returns that you're talking about back to those foundations are capped. And so the incentives around all of that are very different. So yes, our terms do look different, but the whole point of our goal is to make sure that what is built is now attractive and able to take the normal term sheets of a downstream investor. So to maintain and create those incentives that the market would see, not necessarily that the incentives of a local economic development group would want, but that the market would want downstream. That's the goal of what we're doing with what the terms we built in.
Got it. To that end, I mean, do you have any advice for entrepreneurs that you've worked with that are in that situation? I'd be curious to hear about what you typically recommend to these folks.
Yeah, you can probably imagine the founders love our terms, but but that only means that it's going to be a little harder when you take the money downstream because you've gotten easier money. I think probably getting an SBIR, it's hard for people to get free money or discounted money and then have sticker shock when the actual investment vehicles come in that require the returns necessary to have a venture firm. But the idea that an entrepreneur needs to make sure they look a lot like what a venture firm wants. You have to make sure you've built something. So down to your cap table, is your cap table messy? That's probably one of the first places we go is reincorporation, because you incorporated not in Delaware, or looking at that cap table and wondering why there are 13 grad students on that cap table, right? There's just a lot of mess that sometimes needs to be cleaned up, and some of that even goes as deep into the licensing options and figuring out who else previously industry might have been involved, and might make it messy downstream. Clean it as much as possible, and then get that good business talent in there that's raised before and can really help navigate.
Sure. I remember looking on your website, there is a strong emphasis on cleaning up the cap table. And as far as horror stories go, I'm sure both founders as well as investors have them where things have popped up where it's been particularly surprising. Falon, I was wondering if you could, talk to us about some of your experiences during diligence of companies in these markets that has been, particularly unique, or if you have any stories or advice to share for these entrepreneurs.
Our diligence is very different with every single company we look at, because they vary in stage, and a vaccine versus a cybersecurity company versus a fintech company are all very different. So it really, there is no pattern to it. We're trying to establish some pattern recognition, but the team itself is a really important piece of it. And I'm not saying anything unique here, but the founder being passionate and having a unique ability to solve the problem that they're going after is something that just can't be replicated. I think that's just the most important piece here, is that passion, because it is hard, it is lonely, and you will have a lot of bumps in the road no matter what. Even in a crazy time like this, there's going to be bumps in the road. And so the founder themselves being really passionate about this, I think, is important. As far as advice goes, I guess I would just tag on to that and say, do something you're passionate about, because this is a long slog. You're going to talk to hundreds of investors before you get that investment. And that's just the beginning. That's the very beginning. Acquiring customers, continuing to build this. It's a 10-year slog for the most part. And so do something that you love.
Sure. And Abby, any further thoughts as far as advice that you would give to entrepreneurs for companies that you typically target?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a few pieces of advice. Definitely agree with everything that Falon said about the team. I mean, that is so important. That's super important for us. Not only them being talented and qualified, but also them being coachable, humble, and easy to work with. That's the number one thing that we look for. I think it's very easy, especially if you're the founder of a hot startup that gets a lot of media attention and attention from VCs. It's very easy to have a big ego. And that's the type of thing that is really going to hurt founders down the road. Because like Falon said, there are bumps in the road and inevitably bad things happen. And you want a founder that is practical and logical enough to be able to solve those issues instead of just getting wrapped up in sort of their identity around the brand and the company. So that's massively important. Is just be humble and, recognize that nothing is beneath you, and you have to put the work in and really make it happen, regardless of what the press is saying about you or how many big name VCs you have on your cap table. And then do something different. I can't tell you how many startups I run into that are just doing different iterations of the same thing that I've seen over and over again. And obviously there can be differentiation around brand. It's not a bad thing to have competitors, but really what VCs are looking for is something that stands out as being truly innovative and is solving a big problem. I see lots of companies that are targeting, problems that are not really big world-changing problems necessarily, small problems that just make things marginally better for people on the day-to-day. And I think with the pandemic has come a big realization that we need to be focusing on climate change. We need to be focusing on human health. We need to be focusing on mental health. We need to be focusing on, big problems that actually need solutions. And I think we're starting to see a big shift in VCs as well as other types of investors wanting to back those types of solutions to big world-changing problems. So I think making sure that you're doing something different and you're doing it in a space that's big and important and absolutely necessary is the number one thing to consider when you're first conceptualizing your startup.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and I agree with everything that you guys are saying. When you guys are doing deals in smaller markets and rural areas or small communities or university towns, and you see something that you really like, how much interaction do you guys have with other venture investors or other potential partners that would make sense to bring them in or to alert them to these opportunities? Lydia, I guess I'll start with you on that. Do you often help these companies approach other investors to, close out financing rounds or to bring other people to the table?
Of course. Yeah, I mean, that's one of our main goals. The type of entities that typically come in with our friendly term sheet or at the same stage as ours typically are the university funds or somebody that sits really close to the university, maybe some angels on that side. But we take a board seat, and then our hope is that we can get off that board seat so we can go sit on another board seat somewhere else and do that work again. But that only comes when you get that next round raised and you find someone that you can trust to be on that board and take that, fiscally watch that company move forward. So we do work a lot with both investors at our own stage and then the next stage after.
Sure. And Falon, a little bit further downstream in the A and B rounds that you guys typically invest in, do you guys bring in other investors that you're familiar and comfortable with from time to time to meet these companies as well?
Yeah, we do. As a generalist fund, we see lots of different types of companies. And so, if we're looking at, say, a D2C company, it'd be really important to us to have a very strong D2C investor on the cap table that we can lean on and that we trust. Same goes for, specialized biotechnology company or whatever it may be. We also see a lot of companies that are fantastic, but just a little bit too early for us. So we have a lot of great friends who are seed investors that will pass those along to, then hopes that we'll get the chance to look at them again in 12 to 24 months.
Sure. I mean, that makes sense. And Abby, what about for you? I mean, do you guys work with other funds or make any recommendations for folks to bring in investment rounds?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we're invested in a company, we want them to be well capitalized, and that's our first priority. So I think the extent that we do that obviously varies based on what the capital needs are, and how much success that the company already has had raising and syndicating around. But we have an excellent network in the VC ecosystem with other funds that invest in food and ag, both funds that are specific to that sector as well as industry agnostic funds looking to get into the space. The latter is actually my favorite because a lot of, big name funds like NEA, for example, we did a deal with, they'll call us and ask for our expertise, which always feels good, of being a small fund and a young fund, being able to work with an NEA or a coastal or a firm like that on a deal is always a really exciting time. So to the extent that we can get folks that weren't previously excited about the food and ag space to be investing in it and educated about it, that's one of my favorite ways to syndicate. Also our LPs too, I mean, they always have sort of first dibs on those investment rights in those companies if they want to follow on. So to the extent that those companies are strategic for them or interesting for them, we see a lot of participation there as well.
Sure. And to that point, with the much larger funds, the NEAs and the coastals of the world, have you guys seen an increased interest in companies that are not necessarily on the coast? Is that something that you think is going to continue moving forward?
Absolutely. Yes. I think, especially with the pandemic, I think, again, going back to what I was saying about big problems, and that being really where all the opportunities are. I think, if you're just solving problems for the same set of people that live in the same geography and are all of the same sort of class and professional background, you aren't really going to be able to capitalize on the majority of the consumers that are out there for, both from a B2C and a B2B perspective. So I think there's starting to become increased awakening around that in some of the more bubbly cities like SF and New York. Sure. And I think that that's something we're going to see well into the future.
Falon, I see you nodding in agreement.
Yeah.
I assume that you're seeing that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The capital is still concentrated on the coast. I don't remember what the statistics are, but like 75% of it is in three zip codes. But these companies are growing like weeds, and these are large companies, for the country, not just, for Ohio or for Pennsylvania. And so it's only natural that we see, the Sequoias and the Coastlas, starting to pour more capital as these companies, get to that stage C, stage D round, because I think a lot of these companies would love to take local capital as long as they can, but we just don't have a lot of really large funds here yet.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've certainly anecdotally seen a lot more interest from venture funds in the Pittsburgh and in the Pittsburgh area from the funds that are on the coast. What we have is probably what a lot of the problems that we have in Pittsburgh are probably somewhat similar to what you see in Ohio or in some of these other communities as well, where you can get the very early stage fund financing in the door, but you have issues when it comes to the A and the B round funding. It's kind of like a financing graveyard to a certain extent, where you need that money to come in from outside the region, and it's nice for us to at least see that is coming in. Lydia, I'd be curious as to your experiences as well. For the companies that you guys are working with, have you seen additional interest from more funds than you've seen historically?
I don't think so. So I'll talk a little bit more generally. I mean, there's still it's the last year has been an epic year for life science venture. So yes, but I would say relatively, then probably not. There's just a lot of interest in general in life sciences across the US. One of the problems that coastal investors have is what we've been talking about, is deal flow. How do you find the deals that you want to invest in? And do you put someone on the ground? Do you trust the network? And a lot of what we're doing is creating a network that, puts people up and says, look at these now, like the venture showcases and that. So we have a responsibility in our ecosystems to nominate, but in the same way, we also, we all have our own biases. So the issue with trying to help the coastal funds find deals in the middle is a big one. And I think we all need to think about how we're doing that. One of the ways we tried to solve it, and I don't think we've really cracked it fully yet, is creating a data model. So we have over 100 universities now in our data model with 700,000 faculty, and we monitor them monthly to try and figure out, doesn't matter what you look like, who you are, how long you've been doing what you're doing. Are you about to explode with some big idea? And can our data model tell us that, so we can completely remove ourselves and anyone else who may have just built-in biases from that equation? So I think that we can all think pretty openly, I hope, at this point, about how to find people and how to nominate them, really, is what we're doing to the coastal investors or any venture firm that's farther downstream.
Thanks. That's certainly helpful. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, and we have a couple questions from the audience. So let me bring those up and see if we can get them as well. Actually, we don't have any questions. They were, if anyone in the audience has questions, please, now is the time to put them forward. We'd be happy to answer them. Hold on. So here's one we have. The question is there interest in news media related innovation? In Flyover USA, especially, the most trusted news source is local news. Yet thousands of local news organizations have died or were stripped by private equity. I guess the question is more or less focused on, have you seen an interest? I guess this would probably be more posed to Falon and Lydia than Abby, given your focus. But has there been is there any interest, or have you seen any companies that are focused on, that are media focused in your when you're coming across deals that you're looking at, or has it been more based in the traditional venture companies that you're looking at?
I haven't seen a lot. I've seen a little. I think it's very interesting. I've seen some things in the AI space, certainly that can help write sports articles and things like that would cut down on some costs. Local media is incredibly important. I subscribe to like 5 different journals. I think the events piece is a really important piece of that. It's how most of them are able to monetize, at least to get started and get their viewership up. And that's been pretty difficult to do in a pandemic, but Axios is a relatively new organization, just started a couple of years ago. They've been very successful. In Ohio, we have the business journals that have been around for a long time, but they've been very successful with an event / news model. But I think that's a great question and something to definitely give some more consideration to, because it is important, and it is a dying medium, and it's important for our country.
Sure, I agree with that. Lydia, any thoughts on that? I mean, I assume that you don't see those aren't necessarily the companies that you're seeing coming out of universities either.
Yeah.
Sure. So I guess the next question that we have, this can be open to everyone. If one of your funds invests in a company currently in the Midwest or Mid-Atlantic, or discovered in the Midwest, we've touched on this a little, but what are the expectations that the company stays in that region long term? Are there expectations, or is it basically the fact that you guys are comfortable with where they'll go where they need to go to be successful? And if that's not in the same region where they're founded, that's okay. if they can stay there, they will stay there. I guess, Abby, I'll start with you on that one.
Sure. So for our Generation Food Rural Partners Fund, the one commercializing university IP through spinouts, we're seeking an RBIC license for that fund. So that requires us to deploy the vast majority of the capital into rural areas. So those companies will need to stay there. And that's a requirement from the USDA for participating in that program, assuming that we get the license. For our other two funds, those companies can do whatever they want. So those funds are free. Those companies are free to move around as they like.
Sure. Falon, I'd be curious as to if you have any stipulations.
Not at all. We think companies should grow where they're best suited to grow. I think Ohio is an incredible place to grow a company for some verticals, and they should absolutely consider moving here. And if they need to move to Portland to find more talent in apparel, then you should do that. I think you should grow where you're strongest.
Sure. And Lydia, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, we would expect there to be a strong relationship back to the research lab, which is going to be local, but where the company ends up headquartering, we don't have a preference.
Sure. Well, I think that's about it for the questions, and I think we're about out of time. I want to thank everyone for your time, taking the time out of your day to participate. It was definitely a very interesting and lively discussion, and I think the next session should be coming up shortly. It's the state of venture and growth capital in the COVID-19 area. It's session 2, and we hope you'll join us. That's at 2:30 today. We would obviously like to thank all of our sponsors for participating, and everyone for joining us here. Thanks so much for your time.